Alright, I'm going to continue reading First Samuel starting from chapter 15. Then Samuel said to Saul, Jehovah sent me to appoint you as king over his people Israel. Now listen to what Jehovah has to say. This is what Jehovah of armies says. I will call to account the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they opposed them along their way coming up from Egypt. Now go and strike down the Amalekites and devote them to destruction along with what they have. You must not spare them. You are to put them to death, men as well as women, child as well as infant, bull as well as sheep, camel as well as donkey. Saul summoned the people and counted them in Telaim. There were 20,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men of Judah. Saul advanced as far as the city of Amalek and sent an ambush by the valley. Saul then said to the Kenites, Go, depart from the Amalekites, so that I do not sweep you away with them, for you showed loyal love to all the people of Israel at the time they camped up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from the midst of Amalek. After that, Saul struck down the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is next to Egypt. He caught Agag, the king of Amalek, alive, but all the other people he devoted to destruction with the sword. However, Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the flock, the herd, the fatted animals, the rams, and all that was good. They did not want to devote them to destruction, but all the goods that were worthless and unwanted, these they devoted to destruction. Then the word of Jehovah came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned away from following me, and he has not carried out my words. Samuel became very upset, and he kept crying out to Jehovah all night long. When Samuel got up early in the morning to meet Saul, Samuel was told. Saul went to Carmel, and there he erected a monument for himself. Then he turned around and went down to Gilgal. When Samuel finally came to him, Saul said to him, May Jehovah bless you. I have carried out the word of Jehovah. But Samuel said, Then what is this sound of the flock in my ears, and the sound of the cattle that I hear? And Saul said, They were brought from the Amalekites, because the people spared the best of the flock and the herd for sacrificing them to Jehovah your God. But what was left we devoted to destruction. At this Samuel said to Saul, Stop, let me tell you what Jehovah said to me last night. So he said to him, Speak. Samuel continued, Were you not insignificant in your own eyes that you were made head of the tribes of Israel, and when Jehovah anointed you as king over Israel? Jehovah later sent you on a mission and said, Go and devote the sinful Amalekites to destruction. Fight against them until you have exterminated them. So why did you not obey the voice of Jehovah? Instead you rushed greedily toward the spoil and did what was bad in the eyes of Jehovah. However, Saul said to Samuel, But I have obeyed the voice of Jehovah. I went on the mission to which Jehovah sent me, and I brought back Agag, the king of Amalek. And I devoted the Amalekites to destruction. But the people took sheep and cattle from the spoil, the best of what was devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to Jehovah your God at Gilgal. Samuel then said, Does Jehovah take as much pleasure in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of Jehovah? Look, to obey is better than to sacrifice, and to pay attention better than fat of rams. For rebelliousness is the same as the sin of divination, and pushing ahead presumptuously the same as using magical power and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of Jehovah, he has rejected you from being king. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have overstepped the order of Jehovah, and your words, because I have feared the people and listened to what they said. And now please pardon my sin and return with me, so that I may bow down to Jehovah. But Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of Jehovah, and Jehovah has rejected you from continuing as king over Israel. As Samuel was turning to go, Saul grabbed hold of the hem of his sleeveless coat, but it was ripped away. At this Samuel said to him, Jehovah has ripped away the royal rule of Israel from you today, and he will give it to one of your fellow men who is better than you. Moreover, the excellency of Israel will not prove false or change his mind, for he is not a mere man that he should change his mind. At this he said, I have sinned, but honor me, please, in front of the elders of my people and in front of Israel. Return with me, and I will bow down to Jehovah your God. So Samuel returned behind Saul, and Saul bowed down to Jehovah. And Samuel said, Bring Agag, the king of Amalek, near to me. And Agag went to him reluctantly, for Agag had been saying to himself, Surely the threat of death is past. However, Samuel said, Just as your sword has bereaved women of children, so your mother will be most bereaved among women. With that, Samuel hacked Agag to pieces before Jehovah at Gilgal. Samuel now went to Ramoth, and Saul went up to his own house at Gibeah of Saul. Samuel did not see Saul again until the day of his death, for Samuel went into mourning for Saul, and Jehovah regretted that he made Saul king over Israel. Jehovah eventually said to Samuel, How long will you mourn for Saul, now that I have rejected him from ruling as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, because I have selected from among his sons a king for myself. But Samuel said, How can I go? When Saul hears about it, he will kill me. Jehovah replied, Take a young cow with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to Jehovah. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice. Then I will make known to you what to do. You must anoint for me the one whom I designated to you. Samuel did what Jehovah said. When he came to Bethlehem, the elders of the city were trembling at meeting him, and they said, Does your coming mean peace? To this he said, It means peace. I have come to sacrifice to Jehovah. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to sacrifice. Then he sanctified Jesse and his sons, after which he summoned them to the sacrifice. As they came in and he saw Eliab, he said, Surely here before Jehovah stands his anointed one. But Jehovah said to Samuel, Do not pay attention to his appearance or how tall he is, for I have rejected him. For the way man sees is not the way God sees, because mere man sees what appears to the eyes, but Jehovah sees into the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass before Samuel, but he said, Jehovah has not chosen this one either. Next, Jesse presented Shammah but he said, Jehovah has not chosen this one either. So Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to Jesse, Jehovah has not chosen any of these. Finally Samuel said to Jesse, Are these all your boys? To this he said, The youngest one has been left out until now. He is pasturing the sheep. Then Samuel said to Jesse, Send for him, because he will not sit down for the meal until he comes here. So he sent for him and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and beautiful with beautiful eyes and handsome in appearance. And Jehovah said, "Get up, anoint him, for this is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And the Spirit of Jehovah began to empower David from that day forward. Samuel later rose and went his way to Ramoth. Now the Spirit of Jehovah had departed from Saul, and a bad spirit from Jehovah terrorized him. The servants of Saul said to him, "You see that a bad spirit from God is terrorizing you. Let our Lord please command your servants before you to look for a man who is skilled at playing the harp. Whenever a bad spirit from God comes upon you, he will play it, and you will feel better." So Saul said to his servants, "Find me, please, a man who plays well, and bring him to me." One of the attendants said, "Look, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, play skillfully, and he is a courageous, mighty warrior. He can speak well, and he is handsome, and Jehovah is with him." Saul then sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send to me your son David, who is with the flock." So Jesse loaded a donkey with bread and skin bottle of wine and a young goat, and sent them to Saul with his son David. Thus David came to Saul and began serving him. Saul grew to love him very much, and he became his armor-bearer. Saul sent a message to Jesse, "Please let David remain in my service, for he has found favor in my eyes." Whenever a bad spirit from God came upon Saul, David took the harp and played it, and Saul found relief and felt better, and the bad spirit would depart from him. And the Philistines assembled their armies for war. They assembled at Sokoth, which belongs to Judah, and they camped between Sokoth and Azekah and Ephes-Dammim. Saul and the men of Israel assembled and camped in the valley of Elah, and they drew up battle formation to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied the mountain on one side, and the Israelites occupied the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. Then a companion came from the camps of the Philistines. His name was Goliath, from Gath, and his height was 6 cubits in a span. He had a helmet of copper on his head, and he was wearing a coat of mail of overlapping scales. The height of the copper coat of mail was 5,000 shekels. He had shin guards of copper on his legs, and a javelin of copper slung between his shoulders. The wooden shaft on his spear was like a beam of loom workers, and the iron blade of his spear weighed 600 shekels. And his shield bearer was marching ahead of him. Then he stood and called out to the battle line of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to draw up in battle formation? Am I not the Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourself and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and strike me down, we will become your servants. If I prevail against him and strike him down, you will become our servants and serve us." The Philistine then said, "I do taunt the battle line of Israel this day. Give me a man and let us fight it out." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they became terrified and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of the Ephraite from Bethlehem of Judah named Jesse, who had 8 sons, and who in the days of Saul was already an old man. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the war. The names of his 3 sons who went to war were Eliab, the firstborn, his second son Abinadab, and the third son Shammah. David was the youngest of the 3 oldest followed Saul. David was going back and forth from Saul to tend the sheep of his father at Bethlehem. Meanwhile, the Philistine would come forward and take his position each morning and each evening for 40 days. Then Jesse said to his son David, "Take, please, this ephod of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread, and carry them quickly to your brothers in the camp. And take these 10 portions of cheese to the chief of the thousands. Also, you should check on the welfare of your brothers and bring back some token from them." They were with Saul and all the other men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. So David got up early in the morning and left someone in charge of the sheep. Then he packed up and went just as Jesse had commanded him. When he came to the camp enclosure, the army was going out to the battle line, shouting a battle cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up so that one battle line faced the other battle line. David immediately left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line. When he arrived, he began asking about the welfare of his brothers. While he was speaking with them, there came the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath. He came out from the battle line of the Philistines, and he spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him, terrified. The men of Israel were saying, "Have you seen this man who is coming out? He comes to taunt Israel. The king will give great riches to the man who strikes him down. He will give his own daughter, and he will give the house of his father exemption in Israel." David began to say to the men who were standing near him, "What will be done for the man who strikes down that Philistine over there and takes away reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the battle line of the living God?" Then the people told him the same thing as before. "This is what will be done for the man who strikes him down." When his oldest brother Eliab heard him speak to the men, he became angry with David and said, "Why have you come down? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I well know your presumptuousness and the bad intentions of your heart. You came down just to see the battle." To this David said, "What have I done now? I was only asking a question." So he turned from him towards someone else and asked the same thing as before, and the people gave him the same reply as before. The words that David had spoken were overheard and reported to Saul, so he sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine." But David said to Saul, "You are not able to fight against the Philistine, for you are but a boy, and he has been a soldier from his youth." David then said to Saul, "Your servant became a shepherd of his father's flock, and a lion came, also a bear, and each carried out a sheep from the flock. I went out after it and struck it down and rescued it from its mouth. When it rose up against me, I grabbed it by its fur and struck it down and put it to death. Your servant struck down both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will become like one of them, for he has taunted the battle line of the living God." Then David added, "Jehovah, who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear, he is the one who will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." At this Saul said to David, "Go, and may Jehovah be with you." Saul now clothed David with his garments, and he put a copper helmet on his head, after which he clothed him with a coat of mail. Then David strapped on his sword over his garments and tried to go out, but could not, for he was not used to them. David said to Saul, I'm unable to go in these things, for I'm not used to them. So David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the stream bed and placed them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag. And his sling was in his hand, and he began approaching the Philistine. The Philistine came closer and closer to David, and his shield bearer was ahead of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he sneered at him in contempt, because he was a ruddy and handsome boy. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog, so that you are coming against me with sticks?" With that the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Just come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the heavens and to the beasts of the field." David replied to the Philistine, "You are coming against me with the sword and spear and javelin, but I am coming against you in the name of Jehovah of armies, the God of the battle line of Israel, whom you have taunted. This very day Jehovah will surrender you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And on this day I will give the corpses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the heavens and to the wild beasts of the earth. And people of all the earth will know that there is a God in Israel. And for those gathered here will know that there is not with the sword or the spear that Jehovah saves. For the battle belongs to Jehovah, and he will give all of you into our hand." And the Philistine rose and drew steadily closer to meet David, but David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David thrust his hand into his bag and took a stone from there and slung it. He struck the Philistine in the forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck down the Philistine and put him to death. Though there was no sword in David's hand, David continued running and stood over him. Then he took hold of the Philistine's sword and pulled it out of its sheath and made sure that he was dead by cutting off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their mighty one had died, they fled. And at that the men of Israel and of Judah arose and broke into shouting and pursued the Philistines all the way from the valley to the gates of Ekron. And the slain of the Philistines laid fallen on the road from Sharam as far as Gath and Ekron. After the Israelites returned from hotly pursuing the Philistines, they pillaged their camps. Then David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, and he put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. At that moment Saul saw David go out to meet the Philistine. He said to Abner, the chief of the army, "Whose son is that boy, Abner?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, O king, I do not know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." So as soon as David returned from striking down the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with the head of the Philistine in his hand. Saul now said to him, "Whose son are you, boy?" To which David said, "The son of his servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." As soon as David had finished speaking to Saul, Jonathan and David became bound together in close friendship, and Jonathan began to love him as himself. From that day Saul kept David with him, and he did not allow him to return to his father's house. And Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the sleeveless coat that he wore and gave it to David, along with his gear, his sword, his bow, and his belt. David began going out and was successful. wherever Saul would send him. So Saul put him in charge of the fighting men, and this pleased all the people and the servants of Saul. When David and the others would return from striking down the Philistines, the women would come out from the cities of Israel with song and dance to meet King Saul in tambourines, with rejoicing, and with flutes. The women who were celebrating would sing, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Saul became very angry, and the song displeased him, for he said, They have credited David with tens of thousands, but to me they have credited thousands. The only thing left to give him is the kingship. From that day on, Saul was looking at David suspiciously. The next day, a bad spirit from God gripped Saul, and he started to act strangely inside the house while David was playing music on the harp, as on other occasions. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled the spear, saying to himself, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped from him twice. Then Saul was afraid of David, because Jehovah was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence, and appointed him as chief of the thousands, and David would lead the army into battle. David continued to have success in all he did, and Jehovah was with him. And when Saul saw that he was very successful, he became afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he would lead them in their campaigns. Saul later said to David, Here's my oldest daughter, Merab. I will give her to you as a wife. However, you should continue to display your courage for me and fight the wars of Jehovah. For Saul said to him, Do not let my hand come against him. Let the hand of the Philistines strike him. At this David said to Saul, Who am I and who are my relatives, my father's family in Israel, for me to become son-in-law to the king? However, when the time came to give Saul's daughter, Merab, to David, she had already been given to the wife of Adriel, the Maholathite. Now Saul's daughter, Michal, was in love with David, and it was reported to Saul, and this pleased him. So Saul said, I will give her to him to serve as a snare to him, so that in the hand of the Philistines may come upon him. Saul then said to David a second time, You will form a marriage alliance with me today. Further, Saul ordered his servants, Speak to David secretly and say, Look, the king is pleased with you, and all his servants are fond of you. So now from a marriage alliance with the king. When Saul's servants told David these things, David said, It is a trivial matter to you to form a marriage alliance with the king when I am a poor man and lightly esteemed. Then Saul's servants reported to him, These are the words that David spoke. At that Saul said, This is what you should say to David. The king does not want any bride piece except 100 foreskins from the Philistines to take revenge on the enemies of the king. For Saul was scheming to have David fall by the hand of the Philistines. So his servants reported these words to David, and it was pleasing to David to form a marriage alliance with the king before the allotted time. David went with his men and struck down 200 Philistine men, and David brought the full number of the foreskins to the king to form a marriage alliance with the king. Therefore, David gave him his daughter Michal as a wife. Saul realized that Jehovah was with David and that his daughter Michal loved him. This made Saul even more afraid of David, and Saul became an enemy of David for the rest of his life. The princes of the Philistines would go out to battle, but as often as they went out, David was more successful than all the servants of Saul, and his name was highly esteemed. Saul later spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants about putting David to death. Since Saul's son Jonathan was very fond of David, Jonathan told David, "My father Saul wants to have you put to death. Please be on your guard in the morning and go to the secret place and remain hidden. I will go out and stand next to my father in the field where you will be, and I will talk about you to my father, and if I learn anything, I will be sure to tell you." So Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul. He said to him, "The king should not sin against his servant David, for he has not sinned against you, and what he has done for you has benefited you. He risked his life to strike down the Philistine, so that Jehovah brought a great victory for all Israel. You saw it, and you were overjoyed. So why should you sin against innocent blood in having David put to death for no reason?" Saul listened to Jonathan, and Saul swore, "As surely as Jehovah is living, he will not be put to death." Afterward, Jonathan called David and told him all the things. So Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he continued to serve him as before. In time, war broke out again, and David went out and fought against the Philistines and struck them down with a great slaughter, and they fled from before him. And a bad spirit from Jehovah came upon Saul when he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, while David was playing music on the harp. Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul and dove the spear into the wall. Who drove the spear into the wall. David fled and escaped during that night. Saul later sent messengers to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. But David's wife, Michal, told him, "If you do not escape tonight, tomorrow you will be a dead man." Immediately Michal let David down through the window so that he could run away and escape. Michal took the teraphim statue and placed it on the bed, and she put a net of goat's hair in the place of his head, and she covered it with a garment. Saul now sent messengers to take David, but she said, "He is sick." So Saul sent the messenger to see David and told them, "Bring him to me on his bed and have him put to death." When the messengers came in, there was a teraphim statue on the bed and a net of goat hair where his head would have been. Saul said to Michal, Why did you trick me like this and send my enemy away so that he could escape?" Michal replied to Saul, "He said to me, 'Send me away or I will kill you.'" Now David had run away and escaped, and he came to Samuel at Ramoth. He told him that all that Saul had done to him. Then he said to Samuel, Then he and Samuel went away, and they stayed in Naioth. In time it was reported to Saul, "Look, David is in Naioth and Ramoth." At once Saul sent messengers to seize David. When they saw the elderly ones of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing and prophesying over them, the Spirit of God came upon Saul's messengers, and they began behaving as prophets as well. When they told it to Saul, he immediately sent out other messengers, and they too began behaving as prophets. So Saul sent messengers again, a third group, and they too began behaving as prophets. Finally, he also went to Ramoth, where he reached the great cistern that is in Seku. He said, "Where is Samuel and David?" They replied, "They're in Naioth and Ramah." While Saul was on his way from there to Naioth and Ramah, the Spirit of God came upon him as well, and he walked along behaving as a prophet until he came to Naioth and Ramah. He also stripped his garments. He also stripped off his garments, and he too behaved as a prophet before Samuel, and they laid there naked all that day and all that night. That is why they said, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" And David ran away from Naioth and Ramah. However, he came to Jonathan and said, "What have I done? What is my offense? And how have I sinned against your father for him to seek my life?" At this Jonathan said to him, "It is unthinkable. You will not die. Look, my father will not do anything great or small without disclosing it to me. Why should my father hide this matter from him? This will not happen." But David swore further and said, "Your father surely knows that I have found favor in your eyes, and would say, "Do not let Jonathan know this, or he will be upset." But as surely as Jehovah is living, and as surely as you are living, there is only a step between me and death. And Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." David said to Jonathan, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and I am certainly expected to sit with the king to eat. You must send me away, and I will hide in the field until the evening on the third day. If your father misses me at all, then say, 'David begged me for permission to go quickly to his city, Bethlehem, because there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family.' If his response is, 'That's fine,' it means peace to your servant. But if he becomes angry, you can be sure that he is determined to harm me. Show loyal love to your servant, for you have brought your servant into Jehovah's covenant with you. But if I am guilty, put me to death yourself. Why turn me over to your father?" To this Jonathan said, "It is unthinkable to suggest that about you. If I learn that my father is determined to harm you, would I not tell you?" Then David said to Jonathan, Who will tell me whether your father gives you a harsh answer?" Jonathan said to David, "Come, let us go into the field." So both of them went into the field. And Jonathan said to David, "Let Jehovah, the God of Israel, be a witness that I will sound out my father about this time tomorrow, or by the third day. If he is favorably disposed toward David, I will not then send you word and disclose it to you. But if my father intends to harm you, may Jehovah do that and more to Jonathan. If I do not disclose it to you and send you away in peace, may Jehovah be with you, just as he was with my father. And will you not show me loyal love of Jehovah while I'm alive and even when I die? Never withdraw your loyal love from your household, even when Jehovah wipes out all the enemies of David from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with those of David, saying, "Jehovah will require it," and called David's enemies to account. So Jonathan and David swore again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved himself. Jonathan then said to him, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed, for your seat will be vacant. By the third day you will be missed even more, and you must go to the place where you hid the other day, and stay near the stone here. I will then shoot 3 arrows to one side of it, as though I were shooting at a target. When I send that target, I will say, 'Go, find the arrows.' If I say to the attendant, 'Look, the arrows are on that side of you, get them,' then you may come back. For as surely as Jehovah is living, it means everything is peaceful for you, and there is no danger. But if I should say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then go, for Jehovah has sent you away. As for the promise that we have made, you and I, may Jehovah be between us forever." So David hid in the field. When the new moon came, the king took his seat at the meal to eat. The king was sitting in his usual seat by the wall. Jonathan was facing him, and Abner was sitting at Saul's side, but David's place was vacant. Saul did not say anything that day, for he said to himself, "Something has happened so that he is not clean. Yes, he must be unclean." And the day after the new moon, on the second day, David's place continued vacant. Then Saul said to Jonathan his son, "Why has the son of Jesse not come to the meal either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered Saul, "David begged me for permission to go to Bethlehem." He said, "Please permit me to go, because we have a family sacrifice in the city, and my own brother summoned me. So if I have found favor in your eyes, please let me slip away to see my brothers. That is why he has not come to the king's table." And Saul became enraged with Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a rebellious woman, do you think I do not know that you are choosing to side with the son of Jesse, to your own shame and to the shame of your mother? As long as the son of Jesse is alive on the earth, you and your kingship will not be firmly established. So now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die." However, Jonathan said to Saul his father, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" At that, Saul hurled the spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. Jonathan immediately rose up from the table in the heat of anger, and he did not eat any food on the second day after the new moon, for he was upset over David, and his own father had humiliated him. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for the appointment with David, and a young attendant was with him. And he said to his attendant, "Please run and find the arrow that I shoot." The attendant ran, and Jonathan shot the arrow beyond him. When the attendant reached the place where Jonathan had shot the arrow, Jonathan called out to the attendant, "Is not the arrow beyond you?" Jonathan called out to the attendant, "Hurry, go quickly, do not delay." And Jonathan's attendant picked up the arrows and came back to his master. The attendant did not understand anything about the matter. Only Jonathan and David knew what was meant. And Jonathan gave his weapons to his attendant and told him, "Go, take them to the city." When the attendant left, David rose up from the place nearby that was to the south. Then he fell with his face to the ground and bowed 3 times, and they kissed each other and wept for each other, but David wept most. Jonathan then said to David, "Go in peace, since we have both sworn in the name of Jehovah, saying, 'May Jehovah be between you and me, and put your offspring and my between. May Jehovah be between you and me, and between your offspring and my offspring forever.'" Then David rose up and left, and Jonathan went back to the city. David later came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech began to tremble when he met David, and he said to them, "Why are you by yourself and no one is with you?" David replied to Ahimelech the priest, "The king instructed me to do something, but he said, 'Do not let anyone know about the mission on which I am sending you and about the instructions I have given you. I have made an appointment with my young men to meet at at a certain place. Now, if there are 5 loaves of bread at your disposal, just give them to me, or whatever is available." But the priest answered David, "There is no ordinary bread on hand, but there is holy bread, provided that the young men have kept away from women." David answered the priest, "Women have certainly been kept away from us as on previous occasions when I went out on a campaign. If the bodies of young men are holy, even when the mission is ordinary, how much more so today should they be holy? So the priest gave him the holy bread, because there was no bread there except the showbread, which had been removed from Jehovah's presence to be replaced by fresh bread on the day it was taken away. Now one of Saul's servants was there on that day, detained before Jehovah. His name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's servants. David then said to Ahimelech, "Is there a spear or a sword at your disposal? I did not take my own sword or my weapons with me, because the king's mission was urgent." To this the priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, who you struck down in the valley of Elah, is here, wrapped up in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want to take it for yourself, take it, because it's the only one here." David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." To that day, David rose up and continued his flight from Saul. And he eventually came to King Achish of Gath. The servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Is he not the one they sang about when they danced, saying, 'Saul has struck down his thousands and David his tens of thousands'?" David took these words to heart, and he became very much afraid of King Achish of Gath. So he disguised his sanity in their presence, and he acted insane while among them. He was making marks on the doors of the gate and letting his saliva run down his beard. Finally, Achish said to his servants, "You see that this man is crazy. Why did you bring him to me? Do I have a shortage of crazy men that I need to have this one acting crazy before me? Should this man enter my house?" So David went from there, escaping to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's entire house heard of it, they went down there to him, and all those who were in trouble and in debt and who had a grievance gathered to him, and he became their chief, and there were about 400 men with him. David later went from there to Mizpah in Moab, and said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and my mother stay with you until I know what God will do for me." So he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him the whole time that David was in the stronghold. In time, Gad the prophet said to David, "Do not stay in the stronghold. Go from there into the land of Judah." So David left and went into the forest of Hereth. Saul heard that David and the men with him had been found. Saul was sitting in Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the high place, with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were stationed around him. Then Saul said to his servants stationed around him, "Listen, please, you Benjaminites. Will the son of Jesse also give fields and vineyards to all of you? Will he appoint all of you as chiefs of thousands and chiefs of hundreds? All of you have conspired against me. No one informed me when my own son made a covenant with the son of Jesse. Not one of you has sympathy for me and informs me that my son has incited my own servant against me to ambush me, as is now the case." Then Doeg the Edomite, who was stationed there over the servants of Saul, answered, "I saw the son of Jesse come to Nob to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, and he inquired of Jehovah for him and gave him provisions, and he gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine." At once the king sent for Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, the priest, and all the priests of his father's house, who were in Nob. So all of them came to the king. Saul now said, "Listen, please, you son of Ahitub." To which he replied, "Here I am, my lord." Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, by giving him bread and a sword, and by making an inquiry of God for him? He opposes me and waits in ambush, as is now the case." At this Ahimelech answered the king, "Who among all your servants is as trustworthy as David? He is the king's son-in-law and a chief over your bodyguard and honored in your house. Was today the first time I inquired of God for him? What are you saying? What you are saying is unthinkable on my part. Do not let the king hold anything against his servant and against my father's entire house, for your servant did not know a single thing about any of this." But the king said, "You must surely die, Ahimelech, you along with your father's house." With that the king said to the guards stationed around him, "Turn and kill the priest of Jehovah, because they have sided with David." They knew that he was a runaway, and they did not inform me. But the king's servants did not want to lift their hands to assault the priest of David. Then the king said to Doeg, "You turn and assault the priest." Immediately Doeg the Edomite went and assaulted the priest himself. He killed on that day 85 men wearing the linen ephod. He also struck Nob, the city of the priest, with a sword, men as well as women, child as well as infant, bull, donkey, and sheep he put to the sword. However, the son of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, whose name was Abiathar, escaped and ran away to follow David. Abiathar told David, "Saul has killed the priest of Jehovah." At this, David said to Abiathar, "I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would be sure to tell Saul. I am personally responsible for the death of every one in your father's house. Stay with me, do not be afraid. Whoever seeks your life seeks my life. You are under my protection." In time, David was told, "The Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they are raiding the threshing floors." So David inquired of Jehovah, should I go and strike down the Philistines?" Jehovah said to David, "Go, strike down the Philistines and rescue Keilah." But the men of David said to him, "Look, we are afraid while here in Jerusalem. How much more so if we go to Keilah against the battle line of the Philistines?" So David inquired once again of Jehovah. Jehovah now answered him, "Rise up, go down to Keilah, because I will give the Philistines into your hand." So David went with his men to Keilah and fought against the Philistines. He carried off their livestock and struck them down with a great slaughter, and David rescued the inhabitants of Keilah. Now Abiathar the son of Ahimelech ran away to David at Keilah. He had an ephod with him. Saul was told, "David has come to Keilah." Then Saul said, "God has handed him over to me, for he has trapped himself by entering a city with gates and bars." So Saul summoned all the people to war to go down to Keilah and besiege David and his men. When David learned that Saul was plotting against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring the ephod here." Then David said, "O Jehovah, the God of Israel, your servant has indeed heard that Saul intends to come to Keilah to destroy this city because of me. Will the leaders of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Jehovah, the God of Israel, please tell your servant." To this Jehovah said, "He will come down." David asked, "Will the leaders of Keilah surrender me and my men into Saul's hand?" Jehovah replied, "They will surrender you." At once David rose up with his men, about 600 in number, and they left Keilah and moved about wherever they could. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he did not go after him. David stayed in the wilderness in places difficult to approach, in the mountainous regions of the wilderness of Ziph. Saul searched for him constantly, but Jehovah did not give him into his hand. David was aware that Saul had gone out to seek his life, while David was in the wilderness of Ziph to Horesh. Jonathan the son of Saul now went to David at Horesh, and he helped him find strength in Jehovah. He said to him, "Do not be afraid, for my father Saul will not find you. You will be king over Israel, and I will become second to you, and my father Saul also knows that." Then the two of them made a covenant before Jehovah, and David stayed in Horesh, and Jonathan went to his home. The men of Ziph later went up to Saul at Gibeath and said, "Is not David hiding near us in the places difficult to approach at Horesh on the hill of Hachilah, which is south of Jeshimon? Whenever it pleases you to come down, O king, come, and we will surrender him into the land of the king." At this Saul said, "May you be blessed by Jehovah, for you have shown compassion to me. Please go and try to find out exactly where he is, and who saw him there, for I have been told that he is very cunning. Carefully ascertain where all his hiding places are, and return carefully ascertain where all his hiding places are, and return to me with the evidence. I will then go with you, and if he is in the land, I will search him out among all those thousands of Judah." So they left and went to Ziph ahead of Saul, while David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon in the Arabeth to the south of Jeshimon. Then Saul came with his men and look for him. When David was told, he at once went down to the crag and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. When Saul heard this, he chased after David into the wilderness of Maon. As Saul came to one side of the mountain, David and his men were on the other side of the mountain. David was hurrying to get away from Saul, but Saul and his men were closing on David, and his men captured them. But the messenger came to Saul, saying, "Come quickly, for the Philistines have made a raid on the land." At that, Saul stopped chasing after David and went to confront the Philistines. That is why that place was named the Crag of the Divisions. Then David made his way up from there and stayed in places difficult to approach at En-Gedi. As soon as Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he told him, "Look, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." So Saul took 3,000 men chosen from all Israel and went to look for David and his men on the rocky cliffs and the mountain goats. Saul came to the stone sheepfolds along the road where there was a cave, and he went in to relieve himself, while David and his men were sitting in the recesses at the back of the cave. David's men said to him, "This is the day on which Jehovah is saying to you, 'Look, I am giving your enemy into your hand, and you can do to him whatever seems good to you.'" So David rose up and quietly cut off the edge of Saul's sleeveless coat. But afterward, David's heart kept striking him because he had cut off the edge of Saul's sleeveless coat. He said to his men, "It is unthinkable from Jehovah's standpoint that I should do such a thing to my Lord, the anointed of Jehovah, by lifting my hand against him, for he is the anointed of Jehovah. So David restrained himself with these words, and he did not allow them to attack Saul. As for Saul, he rose up from the cave and went on his way. And David got up and went out from the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord, the king." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down with his face to the ground and prostrated himself. David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Look, David is seeking to harm you'? This very day your own eyes have seen how Jehovah gave you into my hand in the cave. But when someone said to kill you, I had pity on you and said, 'I will not lift my hand against my Lord, for he is the anointed of Jehovah.' And look, my father, yes, see the edge of your sleeveless coat in my hand, for when I cut off the edge of your sleeveless coat, I did not kill you. You can now see and understand that I do not intend to harm you or to rebel, and I have not sinned against you, whereas you are hunting me down to take my life. May Jehovah judge between you and me, and may Jehovah take vengeance on you for me, but my hand will not come against you. Just as the ancient proverb says, 'From the wicked comes wickedness, but from my hand will not come against you.' After whom has the king of Israel gone out? From where? Whom are you chasing? A dead dog, a single flea? May Jehovah be the judge, and may Jehovah be the judge, and he will judge between you and me, and he will see and plead my case, and judge me and rescue me from your hand." At that moment, David finished speaking these words to him. Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And Saul began to weep loudly. And he said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have treated me well, and I have repaid you with evil. Yes, today you have told me of the good you did by not killing me when Jehovah surrendered me into your hand. For what man finds his enemy and sends him on his way unharmed, Jehovah will reward you with good because of what you have done for me today. And now look, I know that you will surely rule as king, and that in your hand the kingdom of Israel will endure. Now swear to me by Jehovah that you will not wipe out my descendants after me, and that you will not annihilate my name out of my father's house." So David swore to Saul, after which Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. In time Samuel died, and all Israel gathered together to mourn for him and to bury him at his house in Ramah. Then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Now there was a man in Maon whose work was in Carmel. The man was very wealthy. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And he was then shearing his sheep at Carmel. The man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. The wife was discerning and beautiful, but the husband was a Calebite, was harsh, and he behaved badly. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep, so David sent 10 young men to him. And David told the young man, "Go up to Carmel, and when you come up to Nabal, ask him in my name about his welfare." Then say, May you live long, and may you be well, and may your household be well, and may all that you have be well. Now I hear that you are doing your shearing. When your shepherds were with us, we did not harm them, and they found nothing missing the whole time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. May your young men find favor in your eyes, because we have come at a joyous time. Please give to your servants and to your son David whatever you can spare. So David's young men went back and told all of this to Nabal in David's name. When they finished, Nabal answered David's servants, Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? Nowadays, many servants are breaking away from their master. Do I have to take my bread and my water and my meat that I butchered for my shearers and give it to men who come from who knows where? At that, David's men returned and reported all these words to him. David immediately said to his men, Every one strap on your sword. So they strapped on their swords, and David also strapped on his own sword. And about 4,000 men went up with David, while 200 men stayed with the baggage. Meanwhile, one of the servants reported to Abigail, Nabal's wife, Look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to wish our master well, but he screamed insults at them. Those men were very good to us. They never harmed us, and they did not miss a single thing the whole time we were together with them in the fields. They were like a protective wall around us, both by night and by day, the whole time we were with them shepherding the flock. Now decide what you are going to do, for a disaster has been determined against our master and against all his house, and he is such a worthless man that no one can speak to him. So Abigail quickly took 200 loaves of bread, 2 large jars of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seah measures of roasted grain, 100 cakes of resins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and put all of them on the donkeys. Then she said to her servants, Go ahead of me, I will follow you. But she said nothing to her husband Nabal. While she was riding on the donkey and going down under the mountain, just then David and his men were coming down toward her, and she met them. Now David had been saying, It was for nothing that I guarded everything that belongs to this fellow in the wilderness. Not a single thing belonging to him went missing, and yet he repays me good for evil for good. May God do the same and more to the enemies of David, if I allow a single male of his to survive until the morning. When Abigail caught sight of David, she hurried down off the donkey and threw herself face down before David, bowing to the ground. Then she fell at his feet and said, My lord, let the blame be on me, and let your servant girl speak to you, and listen to the words of your servant girl. Please do not let my lord pay attention to this worthless Nabal, for he is just like his name. Nabal is his name, and senselessness is with him. But I, your servant girl, did not see my lord's young men whom I sent you. And now, my lord, as surely as Jehovah is living, and as you are living, it is Jehovah who has held you back from incurring blood guilt and from taking revenge with your own hand. May your enemies and may those speaking injuries to my lord become like Nabal. Now let this gift that your servant girl has brought to my lord be given to the young men who are following my lord. Pardon, please, the transgression of your servant girl, for Jehovah will without fail make my lord a lasting house, because my lord is fighting the wars of Jehovah, and no evil has been found in all your days. When someone rises up to pursue you and seeks your life, The life of my Lord will be wrapped securely in the bag of life with Jehovah your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away like stones from a sling. And when Jehovah has done for my Lord all the good things he has promised, and he appoints you as leader over Israel, you will have no remorse or regret in your heart for shedding blood without cause, and for letting the land of my Lord take revenge. When Jehovah confers good upon my Lord, remember your servant girl. At this David said to Abigail, Praise Jehovah, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me, and blessed be your good sense. May you be blessed for restraining me this day from inquiring blood guilt and from taking revenge with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as Jehovah, the God of Israel, who has held me back from harming you, is living, if you had not come quickly to meet me by morning, there would not have remained a single male belonging to Nabal. With that, David accepted from her what she had brought him and said to her, Go up in the place of your house. See, I have listened to you, and I will grant your request. Abigail later went back to Nabal, who was feasting like a king in his house, and Nabal was in a good mood and was as drunk as could be. She did not tell him a single thing until the morning light. And in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him these things, and his heart became like a dead man's, and he laid paralyzed like stone. About 10 days later, Jehovah struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal had died, she said, Praise Jehovah, who has pleaded my cause of reproach from Nabal, and has kept his servant from doing anything bad. And Jehovah has brought this badness of Nabal back to his own head. Then David sent word to propose to Abigail to take her as his wife. So David's servants came to Abigail at Carmel and said to her, David has sent us to you to take you as his wife. She immediately rose up and bowed her face to the ground and said, Here is your slave as a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. Then Abigail quickly rose and rode on her donkey with 5 of her female servants walking behind her. She accompanied the messengers of David and became his wife. David also married Ahinoam from Jezreel, and both women became his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was from Galim. In time, the men of Ziph came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, David is not hiding on the hill of Hakilah, facing Jessamon. So Saul rose up and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to look for David in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul camped on the hill of Hakilah, which faces Jessamon by the road. David was then living in the wilderness, and he learned that Saul had come into the wilderness after him. So David sent spies to verify that Saul had indeed come. David later went to the place where Saul had encamped, and David saw that place where Saul and Abner, the son of Ner, the chief of his army, were lying asleep. Saul lay asleep in the camp enclosure with the troops camping all around him. And David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, the brother of Joab, Who will go down with me to the camp? Who will go down with me into the camp to Saul? Abishai replied, I will go down with you. So David and Abishai made their way to the troops by night, and they found Saul laying asleep in the camp enclosure with his spear stuck into the ground next to his head. Abner and the troops were laying all around him. Abishai now said to David, Today God has surrendered your enemy into your hand. Now please, let me pin him into the ground with a spear just once, and I will not need to do it twice. However, David said to Abishai, Do not harm him, for who can lift his hand against the anointed of Jehovah and remain innocent? David continued, As surely as Jehovah is living, Jehovah himself will strike him down, or his day will come and he will die, or he will go down into battle and perish. It is unthinkable from Jehovah's standpoint for me to lift my hand against the anointed of Jehovah. So now take, please, the spear next to his head and the water jug, and let us be on our way. So David took the spear and the water jug from next to Saul's head, and they went away. No one saw or noticed them or woke up, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from Jehovah had fallen upon them. Then David crossed to the other side and stood on the top of the mountain, some distance away, with a considerable space between them. David called out to the troops and to Abner, the son of Ner, saying, Abner, will you not answer? Abner answered, Who are you who calls to the king? David answered Abner, Are you not a man? And who is like you in Israel? So why did you not keep watch over your lord the king? For one of the soldiers came in to do away with your lord the king. What have you done? What you have done is not good. As surely as Jehovah is living, you deserve to die, because you have not kept watch over your Lord, the anointed of Jehovah. Now look around. Where are the king's spears and the water jug that were next to his head? Then Saul recognized the voice of David and said, Is this your voice, my son David? David replied, It is my voice, my lord the king. He added, Why is my lord chasing after his servant? For what have I done, and what am I guilty of? My lord the king, please listen to the words of his servant. If it is Jehovah who has incited you against me, let him accept my grain offering. But if men have incited you, they are cursed before Jehovah, because they have driven me away today from being united with Jehovah's inheritance, saying, Go, serve other gods. And now do not let my blood fall to the ground away from the presence of Jehovah, for the king of Israel has gone out to look for a single flea, as if he were chasing a partridge on the mountains. In turn, Saul said, I have sinned. Come back, my son David, for I will do you no harm, because you regarded my life as precious this day. Yes, I have acted foolishly and have made a terrible mistake. David answered, Here is the spear of the king. Let one of the young men come over and take it. It is Jehovah who will repay each one for his own righteousness and his own faithfulness. For today Jehovah gave you into my hand, but I was unwilling to lift my hand against the anointed of Jehovah. Look, just as your life was precious to me on this day, so my life be precious in the eyes of Jehovah, and may he rescue me out of all distress. Saul replied to David, May you be blessed, my son David. You will surely do great things, and you will surely prevail. Then David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. However, David said in his heart, One day I will perish by Saul's hand. The best thing for me is to escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will give up looking for me in all the territory of Israel, and I will escape from his hand. So David rose up with the 600 men who were with him, and went over to Achish, the son of Malch, the king of Gath. David stayed with Achish in Gath, he and his men, each man with his household. With David were his two wives, Ahinoam and Ahinoam of Jezreel, and Abigail the Carmelite, Nabal's widow. When report was made to Saul that David had run away to Gath, he stopped searching for him. When David said to Achish, "I have found favor in your eyes. Let them give me a place in one of the cities of the countryside, so that I may live there. Why should your servant live in the royal city with you?" So Achish gave him Ziklag on that day. That is why Ziklag belongs to the kings of Judah down to this day. The length of time that David lived in the countryside of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. David would go up with his men and raid the Gershites and the Gizites and the Amalekites, for they were inhabiting the land that extended from Talam as far as Zor and down to the land of Egypt. When David would attack the land, he preserved neither man nor woman alive, but he took the flocks, herds, donkeys, camels, and clothing, after which he returned to Achish. And Achish would ask, "Where did you make a raid today?" David would replied, "Against the south of Judah, or against the south of the Jerahmeelites, or against the south of the Kenites." David did not spare any man or woman to be brought to Gath, saying that they must not tell them about us and say, "This is what David did." And that was his practice the whole time he lived on the countryside of the Philistines. So Achish believed David, saying to himself, "He has certainly become a stench among his people Israel, so he will always be my servant." In those days, the Philistines assembled their armories of war against Israel. So Achish said to David, "You know, of course, that you and your men will go out into battle with me." At that, David said to Achish, "You surely know that your servant will do. You surely know what your servant will do." Achish said to David, "That is why I will appoint you as my permanent bodyguard." Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned him and had buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had removed the spirit mediums and the fortune tellers from the land. The Philistines assembled and went and set up camp in Shunem. And Saul assembled all Israel, and they set up camp in Gilboa. When Saul saw the camp of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. Although Saul would inquire of Jehovah, Jehovah never answered him, either in dreams or by Urim or through prophets. Finally Saul said to his servants, "Find me a woman who is a spirit medium, and I will go and consult her." His servants replied, "Look, there is a woman who is a spirit medium in Endor." So Saul distinguished himself and put on other garments and went to the woman by night with 2 of his men. He said, "Use divination, please, by acting as a spirit medium, and bring up for me the one whom I designate to you." However, the woman said to him, "You must know what Saul did. how he removed the spirit mediums and the fortune tellers from the land. Why then are you trying to trap me, to have me put to death?" Saul then swore to her by Jehovah, saying, "As surely as Jehovah is alive, you will not incur any guilt in this matter." At this the woman said, "Whom should I bring up for you?" He replied, "Bring up Samuel for me." With that the woman saw Samuel. She cried out at the top of her voice to Saul, "Why did you trick me? You are Saul." The king said to her, "Do not be afraid, but what do you see?" The woman replied to Saul, "I see one like a god coming up out of the earth." At once he asked her, "What does he look like?" To which he said, "It is an old man coming up, and he is clothed in a sleeveless coat." At that Saul realized that it was Samuel, and he bowed low with his face to the ground and prostrated himself. And Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by having me brought up?" Saul replied, "I'm in great trouble. The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me and no longer answers me, either through the prophets or in dreams. So that is why I am calling on you to let me know what I should do." And Samuel said, "What do you inquire of me now that Jehovah has departed from you and has become your adversary? Jehovah will do for himself what he has foretold through me. Jehovah will rip the kingdom. Jehovah will rip the kingdom out of your hands and give it to one of your fellow men, David. But you did not obey the voice of Jehovah, and you did not execute his burning anger against the Amalekites. That is why Jehovah is doing this to you this day. Jehovah will also give both Israel and you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Jehovah will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines." At once Saul fell full length on the ground and became very much afraid because of Samuel's words, and there was no strength left in him, and because he had not eaten food all day and all night. When the woman came to Saul and saw that he had been greatly disturbed, she said to him, "Here your servant has obeyed and what you said, and I risked my life and did what you told me to do. Now, please, listen to what your servant has to say. Let me set before you a piece of bread, then eat so that you will have no strength to go on your way." But he refused and said, "I'm not going to eat." However, his servants and also the woman kept urging him. Finally, he listened to them and got up from the ground and sat on the bed. And the woman had a fattened calf in the house, so she quickly slaughtered it and took flour and kneaded dough and baked it into unleavened bread. She served them to Saul and his servants, and they ate. After that, they rose up and left during the night. The Philistines assembled all their armies at Aphek, while the Israelites were camping by the spring in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines were passing by with their hundreds and their thousands, and David and his men were marching at the rear with Achish. But the princes of the Philistines said, "Why are the Hebrews here?" Achish replied to the princes of the Philistines, "This is David, the servant of King Saul of Israel, who has been with me for a year or more. I have not found any fault in him from the day he deserted me until today." But the princes of the Philistines became indignant at him, and they said to him, "Make the man go back. Let him return to the place where you assigned him. Do not let him go down with us into battle, so that he will not turn against us during the battle. For what better way to put yourself in favor of his lords than with the heads of our men? Is this not the David about whom they sung when they danced, saying, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. So Achish summoned David and said to him, Surely as Jehovah is living, you are upright, and I am pleased to have you go on the campaign with my army. For I have not found any fault with you from the day you came to me until today, but the lords do not trust you. So return to the place and do not do anything to displease the lords of the Philistines. However, David said to Achish, Why, what have I done? What fault have you found in your servant from the day that I came to you until today? Why should I not come with you to fight against the enemies of my lord the king? Achish answered David, From my standpoint, you have been as good as an angel of God. But the princes of the Philistines have said, Do not let him go up with us into the battle. Now get up early in the morning with the servants for your Lord who came with you. Rise up and leave early in the morning as soon as it is light. So David and his men rose up early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel. When David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid on the south and on Ziklag, and they had attacked Ziklag and burned it with fire. They had taken captive the women and all who were in it, from the smallest to the greatest, and they had not killed anyone, but they had carried them off and had gone on their way. When David and his men came to the city, they found it burned down, and their wives and their sons and their daughters had been carried off captive. So David and the men with him began weeping loudly until they had no strength left to weep. David's 2 wives had also been carried off captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. David was very distressed because the men were talking of stoning him, for all the men had become very bitter over the loss of their sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself by Jehovah's God. David then said to Abiathar, the priest, the son of Ahimelech, Please bring the ephod here. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David. David inquired of Jehovah, Should I chase after this marauder band? Will I overtake them? At this he said to him, Go. At this he said to him, Go in pursuit, for you will certainly overtake him, and you will make the rescue. David immediately set out with 600 men who were with him, and they went on as far as the Wadi Bezor, where some of the men stayed behind. David kept up the chase with 400 men, but 200 men who were too tired to cross the Wadi Bezor stayed behind. They found an Egyptian man in the field and took him to David, and they gave him food to eat and water to drink, as well as a slice of cake, a pressed figs, and 2 cakes of resins. After he ate, he regained his strength, for they had not eaten any food or drunk any water for 3 days and 3 nights. David now asked him, To whom do you belong, and where are you from? To which he said, I am an Egyptian attendant, a slave of an Amalekite man, but my master left me because I got sick 3 days ago. We made a raid on the south of the Cherethites, on the territory of Judah, and on the south of Caleb and Ziklag we burned with fire. At this David said to him, Will you lead me down to this marauder band? He replied, If you swear to me by God that you will not put me to death, and that you will not hand me over to my master, I will lead you down to this marauder band. So he led him down to where they were spread out all over the land, eating and drinking and celebrating because of all the great spoil that they had taken from the land of the Philistines and the land of Judah. Then David struck them down from the morning darkness until the following evening. Not a man escaped, except 400 men who fled on camels. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing of theirs was missing, from the smallest to the greatest. They recovered their sons and daughters and the spoil. David recovered everything that they had taken. So David took all the flocks and the herds which they have drove before their own livestock. They said, "This is David's spoil." Then David came to the 200 men who had been too tired to go along with David and who had stayed behind the Wadi Bezor, and they came to meet David and the people with him. Then David came near to the men, and he asked them how they were. However, every bad and worthless man among those who had gone with David said, "Since they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we recovered, except that each one may take his wife and his sons and go away." But David said, "You must not do this, my brothers. With that Jehovah has given us, with what Jehovah has given us, he protected us and gave us into the hand. He protected us and gave into our hand the marauder band that came against us. Who would agree with you on this? The share of the one who went down into the battle with the same as the share of the one who sat by the luggage. All will have a share together." And from that day forward he set as a regulation and a rule for Israel down to this day. When David returned to Ziklag, he sent some of the spoil to the elders of Judah, who were his friends, saying, "Here is a gift for you from the spoil of Jehovah's enemies." He sent it to those who were in Bethel, to those in Ramoth of the Negeb, to those in Jatir, to those in Aroer, to those in Simoth, to those in Estimoa, to those in Rakal, to those in the cities of Jerahmeelites, to those in the cities of the Kenites, to those in the Hormath, to those in the Borasan, to those in Atach, to those in Hebron, and to all the places that David and his men had frequented. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel had fled from before the Philistines, and many fell slain in Mount Gilboa. The Philistines kept in close range of Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's sons. The fighting grew fierce against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through with it, so that these uncircumcised men may not come and run me through and deal ruthlessly with me." But his armor-bearer was unwilling, because he was very much afraid. So Saul took his sword and fell on it. When his armor-bearer saw that Saul had died, he too fell on his own sword and died with him. Thus Saul, his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and all his men died together on that day. When the people of Israel who were in the region of the valley and in the region of the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons had died, they began to abandon the cities and flee. And the Philistines then came and occupied them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent word throughout the land of the Philistines to spread the news in the houses of their idols and among the people. Then they put his armor in the house of the Ashtoreth images, and fastened his corpse to the wall of Bethshan. When the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the warriors rose and traveled all night and took the bodies of Saul and his sons off the wall of Bethshan and returned to Jabesh and burned them there. Then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and they fasted for 7 days. Alright, that's the end of First Samuel. Thanks for listening.